very different, and we're on air. This is Jim Groom, and this is another episode of Reclaim Today. And we have the special privilege and honor of actually inviting someone who was kind of watched the birth of video in many ways, John Grahame, who's joining us from Arizona to talk a little bit about some of his history in video. So John, welcome.
Thank you, Jim.
Now, John, I want to actually start this, if it's all right with you, just saying how our paths crossed and why we're even having this conversation, because I personally find it it's interesting to me. Like maybe, like you said, no one else, but for me, this is how the web works, and it's awesome. Yeah. So, John had found a post that I wrote in 2015 about the first VCR my family owned, the Panasonic Omnivision from 1982 VHS, a beautiful, kind of like the Cadillac of VCRs of the time. And I posted about it, and I posted about this other Montgomery Ward two-piece VCR recorder. And I posted this 3 years ago, kind of forgot it. And I get an email from yours truly, John, in which you said, hey, I actually have a little something to share with you, and you might want to take it from there.
Well, I'm 70 years old, and I decided I needed to clean out my house, get rid of stuff. You know, you accumulate stuff early in life, and you get rid of stuff later in life. And I was definitely at the get rid of stuff phase. And I'm not a pack rat, but if I have something that seems to have value to me, I keep it, and I look for opportunities to dispose of it without just throwing it away. And one of the things was this Montgomery Ward, as you say, VCR that I had back from, I think I bought it in '79. And I think I paid, what was it, around $1,100 or something for it.
Yeah.
And so there it was. I had this thing. I'd kept it all these years. It works fine. And but it was so old and outdated, and but I couldn't imagine throwing it away. So I went online to look and see if anybody had any interest in such a thing, or if it might be on eBay or somewhere. So just a Google search, and that's how I found your post.
How bizarre. Yeah, so I mean, it's cool too, because that's in some ways the power of the blog, but it's also, for me, at the time I got that email for you, to give you a little context, I work at a company called Reclaim Hosting. We help run infrastructure for universities. But my kind of passion has been, since the 80s, videotapes, in particular like VHS tapes and video stores. So my partner and I found ourselves in an interesting situation where we could open what was essentially a 1980s video store in Fredericksburg, Virginia, called Reclaim Video. And so when you wrote me that and you showed me the the manual, and the fact you paid $1,300 for that VCR, I was like, this is amazing. And I was really impressed with, the fact, the Omnivision. I didn't know that. What is the relationship? Let me ask you this. What is the relationship between the Montgomery Ward model from like '81 and the Panasonic Omnivision you bought? I think it was like '82. Like, so were they just the same model, just one was branded?
Well, I don't really know. Did the Montgomery Ward model actually, was that branded as a Montgomery Ward product?
I think it was, but I can't see clear enough on the catalog to tell. But I think it was. I'm not sure.
Okay. My sense was that it was probably just sold by Montgomery Ward, because they were kind of a Sears, and that it was a Panasonic product.
Yeah.
As mine was. Mine was a Panasonic product. But it might have been the model number was close or something like that. But there was this two-piece thing. And the reason I bought a two-piece, I was working in the business at the time. And I was doing professional video. I'd started in San Francisco and then went to LA. And then I had a chance to start a new show in Boston called Chronicle, which was going to be an alternative to the way everything was going, which was tabloid, reality TV. So here was it was going to be like the Harvard of magazine shows, the Harvard version of magazine shows, or sort of a local 60 Minutes. So I jumped at that because I was working in LA and getting tired of frankly, the crap that we were turning out. And so I went to Boston, and I was just at this point in my life just fascinated by documentaries, any documentary. My friend said, "You and I have." One of the producers at the station said, "You and I have lust for documentary." And there were a lot of them being done at the time. You know, there was there was a lot of stuff coming on television. The government was supporting public affairs kinds of things, or in fact demanding it. And so I bought this thing for two reasons. One was I decided I was going to record every documentary that came along and watch them. And I had a full-time job, so I would have to watch them at night. And you could set up a timer, you know, and record everything. So I subscribed to TV Guide. And I looked in and I marked all the documentaries and I punched them all into the VCR so it would record them all. And the other reason, of course, the reason I bought the two-piece was, well, I'll probably get a camera at some point and just make my own stuff for my own personal reasons, because I'd done that back in the late 60s and early 70s with a Sony Portapak. So I'd done that before, and now we had something that was in color and better and all that kind of stuff.
And that's a really nice transition. So I want to come back to the Sony Portapak, which we talked about offline. And that's an interesting story that I haven't really heard too many people talk about how powerful the Sony Portapak was to the idea of portable video. Is that right?
Yes, it is. I'll just finish this little bit and then I will go back to that. And that was the reason that I bought this thing was that, as I say, I thought that I might do some of my own videos just for my own purposes, for my own fun, as I'd done with the Portapak. What happened, however, was that pile after pile after pile of VHS tapes, 6-hour tapes, just, you know, they were just all over the place. And I was saying, oh my God, I could never look at this stuff. I can never look at all these documentaries. You know how it is. It just was too much. And I ended up looking at very little of it.
Was there a kind of, when they call it the portable video recorder, right? How portable was it? Like when you had that unit, like, was it, you know, super heavy? Like how was it? How did they imagine portable in 1982?
Well, I just sent this thing to you, and in its little file box that it fit in a plastic file box. It was 28 pounds, and so one piece, you know, you had slung over your shoulder. And that was kind of the electronics, and the other piece was well, actually, come to think of it, no, the piece that you had over your shoulder. You had a camera and just that piece, and then the other piece was the piece that recorded offline. So it was pretty light. It really was, as was the early Portapak. The Sony Portapak was very light. The stuff that was really heavy was the early professional video. You know, we recorded on 3/4 inch U-matic, and that stuff, that just was horrifying. That was I'll go through the weights of all that and tell you about what that was like at some point. That was insane. But yeah, go ahead.
No, please go on.
Just to go back to the Sony Portapak, I had started school in '66 and then dropped out in '68 and then back in 1970 at the University of Massachusetts. And I was a psychology major, but I was interested, my major interest is always, why do people believe what they believe? And so the media interest, it's sort of the McLuhan thing, you know, it's like, what is going on here? Why do people just say, oh yeah, I believe that because, you know, some image is in front of them. And so when I minored in mass media, and when I went and took that first course, the professor said, well, by the way, we have this new camera that's come out. It's a portable video camera. Tape action outside, as it said in the VHS thing. That's the title of all our emails back and forth. Tape action outside, because that's what it said in the early days when they were selling the VHS. But anyway, this Portapak. So I went to the equipment room and checked out a Portapak. And I asked the guy, I said, well, when do you want me to return it? He says, I don't know, we got 10 of them. You're the only guy who's asked for one. Just check with me every once in a while. So I kept it for 2 years. I never brought it back, summer and everything. I just kept it because nobody else seemed that interested. But I thought it was utterly amazing that you could do motion photography out in the field, outside, for nothing. It didn't cost anything at all. You just would recycle this tape, and I would just record my life. I was like Fred Weissman of my own life. You know? I just went out there and I just kept this thing with me all the time. It was light. It was easy to use. It was fun. And at home, when I go back to the dorm room or whatever, the fraternity that I was in, I would hook it up to the TV set, the black and white TV set, just had an RF output. And I just would watch my day. I would review my day on video. And that was astonishing to me. And when you think about it, that was in 1970. It really was kind of an astonishing. Never before in the history of man had we been able to do that for very little money. I mean, if you had lots of money, you could do it in film, get the film developed, but no one did anything like that. I mean, Fred Weissman, sure, he'd set up camera and burn film for a long time, but that was professional. And this was just amateur and for fun. It was amazing to me that I could do that.
And it's crazy the price point, like you said, like it was $115 or $16, I think, in 1970, which, I mean, wouldn't be super cheap, but would totally be affordable for a family.
I didn't even know what that cost because, as I say, I just borrowed it from the school.
Yeah.
But, and the other thing that I did with it, I was in school, and I made instead of writing a final paper, I did a little video for one of my courses, then wheeled in a little black and white monitor into the classroom and hooked it up. And everybody was just awestruck that this guy had done a television show. You know, to them, it wasn't video. It was a television show for his final paper. I had some guy sitting on a stool in a studio in the format of that time, and then rolling tape, and something that I'd done outside. Environmental issues had always been my thing, and so I did several on that. But when I found out how amazed professors and students were by that, I made that my standard. And so I did quite a number of these videos back when I was in school instead of final exams or instead of final papers.
Wow. So early video papers in some
early video papers. Yeah. Yeah. Very early.
Now,
yeah, go ahead.
How did it go? So you were at the University of Massachusetts. You kind of explored this new medium, right? That was starting to hit the streets. Like, what was the impression of video in 1970, 71? Like, how was it just like, what is that? Like, did people understand how it was different from film? Like, was it clear the differences?
No, people just saw it as television, and that's what I created for them. So they didn't have a sense of video, and it wasn't film, it wasn't home movies, because, I mean, what I was doing with it was kind of just documenting my life. But when I brought something into a classroom, it wasn't a home movie, it was a paper, a video paper. And so the format that I used, it was just a standard television show. Again, there was a guy who was in radio on the local radio station who was looking forward to a career in TV. Eventually went on and had a big career with public broadcasting, Mike Moran. And he was my guy. I had him sit in the studio. There was a television studio on campus, and I used my little Portapak and shot him sitting there on his little stool, and he would introduce the documentary. Good evening, I'm Mark Moran, and tonight we're going to look at trash. That kind of thing. And so so nobody really, the idea of video the way we have it now, and of course now we have YouTube and everything else. The medium keeps changing, but it really hadn't happened yet. It happened later with the magazine show. When professional video started to go out in the field, it all kind of loosened up and became magazine show and then reality TV later.
And there is a big jump, say, between, I mean, I'm thinking about this in a swath of, say, a decade. Between 1970 and, say, 82, when you bought the video recorder, there was en masse a movement towards video for home video consumption. You could buy a recorder pretty cheaply, anyone, and kind of, rather than doing the Super 8 now, you were doing video. You play it back, kind of that whole idea of watching your life that you did in the 70s was now catching up in the 80s for a mass market. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I wasn't really doing it. I wasn't really doing that because I was, the reason I bought that part unit was to do that on video, because people were still using, I think, Super 8 at that time, mostly to do the kind of home video thing. So that transition was happening, but I didn't really do that because, again, I was more interested in seeing documentaries, and I was out shooting all day in the professional world. So I just never, I went to the professional side, wanted to go sort of back to the amateur side, but went and stuck with the professional side after that.
Well, and you brought something up, two things I want to ask. First is when you were remarking about the Portapak and the fact that, you could shoot it and then go back and watch it. And it was instantaneous. You could, no producing the film, there was no kind of production or development of that. It just was immediate. Now,
you could edit. And so for the things that I brought into the classroom, I'd edit. For the stuff that I did for myself, I would just roll over the same tape the next day. I mean, I videotaped my life that day, looked at it that night, and went over it the next day.
Now, when you were in the professional video production, one of the films you work from, and you showed me the image, and I'll find the image and I'll share it here, is you work with Coppola on One from the Heart. And it kind of, when you were talking about the early experiments with video you were doing, I mean, this was an experiment which he has dubbed electronic cinema, that in some ways was revolutionary to kind of what video could mean for a director trying to get an instantaneous idea of what his shots and the scenes and the miniatures all look like. I mean, could you talk at all about your time on One from the Heart?
Well, he had created, he'd made a lot of money on Godfather and everything, and so he created Zoetrope Studios, and he had his studio actors, and he was just awash in money and fame, and he could do anything he wanted. And Sony came to him, I think, and said, look, we have this high definition video. You ought to take a look at that. That's the future. And everybody else they went to probably said, oh yeah, big deal. Coppola said, ooh, cool. And so here he was putting together One from the Heart, which is the story that's really, it's about two couples in Las Vegas, and they switch. And it's kind of a small story. It's kind of an intimate story, but he was, with all his money, he was doing it huge. He was building these vast sets of Las Vegas on steroids, if you can imagine such a thing, because it already is. And he was creating these sets, and they were taking too long to build, and his actors were rehearsing, and they were getting bored, and they were just sort of hanging around the studio. So there was Natasha Kinski and Terry Garr, and everybody was like, "All right, what's next, Francis?" And well, we're waiting for the sets to get built. And then somebody suddenly had the idea. Well, what he was doing. So he had hired this guy named Tony Fox, who was the video guy that he knew, and Tony was operating this high definition video. And the video recorder, what was it called? It was I can't think of what it was, but there was a name for it. It was a video disc. It was a high definition video being recorded on video disc where you could write over it. It was a big disc. It was like an LP record. And Sony had this thing. And so we actually ended up Tony ended up shooting the storyboard and putting it on the video disc. And then he would go, and as the actors were rehearsing, they would replace scenes on the video disc with actors rehearsing in rehearsal rooms. And Coppola just kept looking at this and looking at this and looking at this and saying, well, it's not my movie. I don't see my movie. I want to see my movie. And finally he said, okay, the hell with it. Let's just go to Las Vegas, where all the sets were based on real places in Las Vegas. Let's just go to Las Vegas and shoot the movie. And so Tony called me. Tony was a friend of mine back from my San Francisco days, where he had worked for one television station. I worked for another in sort of news and public affairs. He said, hey, let's go shoot this thing with Coppola. So I hired a sound man, and he had his sound man, and the four of us were the entire team. We flew in I think it was a private jet, Coppola's private jet or something, to Las Vegas, hit the ground, went to our hotel rooms. He said, just drop your stuff and let's go shoot the movie. And so two video cameras. And we never went back to the motel room until 36 hours later, when we grabbed our stuff and got back on the jet and went back to LA. So we never slept in the beds of these beautiful hotel rooms, with jacuzzis in them. He was just spending money. Coppola was just spending money then. But, oh, yeah, that's it.
That's awesome. And here's a picture of you with the video camera, Coppola looking like the Godfather with that hat. Yeah. That's pretty awesome.
Absolutely.
And who's the gentleman on the left of Coppola?
So I'm sorry that I don't remember his name, but he was the guy, the freelance sound man that I hired for that shoot.
That's awesome.
He did a great thing. We were we were on the streets of Vegas and shooting this thing, and there were all these famous actors, and there was Francis Ford Coppola, Harry Dean Stanton and Raul Julia and everybody. And we started to gather crowds, and we were doing this non-union too, which was pretty bad. It's not supposed to do anything non-union in Vegas. We just hit the streets filming, and the word started to get out, and we were getting pressed by some people and saying, "Who's that? Is that Natasha Kinski? Oh, can I get her autograph?" And my sound man just suddenly, in a stroke of brilliance, said, "No, that's not really Natasha Kinski. That's a Natasha Kinski lookalike. This is a lookalike contest. And everybody went away. The unions went away. Everybody went away, and we were free. This happened about 12, 15 hours in, and we had another 12, 15, 30, you know, for a total of 36 hours of shooting where nobody bothered us because we were just a dumb lookalike contest.
So
yeah.
After that shoot, the idea, the consensus was this was going to be this is going to be an amazing film. You shot the whole thing on video, which is crazy. The idea of thinking of shooting a film twice, and it does explain some of the expenses. So what happened between the video and the film, and like, what was it about the video that might have been so attractive? Why did it work so well?
So Tony, I wasn't involved after that. So Tony was back in there, and he edited this thing together. And from what Tony told me afterwards, that Coppola just loved it. He thought that he had a total winner. He had a great story. Everybody watched this video and thought it was a great story. And it's still out there somewhere, I'm told. It's you can see this videos, and I don't know where it is, but the video was a big success. But it's really the question of, you know, does the medium really translate to another medium? Because he shot the film on the sets, these huge sets, you know, where there were dance numbers and $16 million, which was a hell of a lot at the time. That's what that film cost, and it didn't translate up, if you know what I mean. Once he took that really kind of small, intimate story about two couples, you know, everybody's sort of struggling in Vegas, going to be, and it doesn't work, and they go back to their original. So it's a beautiful little video and a video story, but when you take it to 70 millimeter on these wild sets, and you have dance numbers and all that kind of stuff, it just didn't fit the story at all, and the movie failed and nearly brought down Coppola. I mean, it really hurt his career. I mean, he never really was Coppola again, you know, after that.
No,
not in the sense he was with The Godfather.
Yeah,
and I think it was that basic misunderstanding of you know, how the media do not translate. I remember Tony used to say, TV is for little screens and movies are for big screens, and don't mix them up. And I think to that sense he was kind of right.
It's cool because one of the things that's also interesting about that is the idea that he was Coppola in some ways, like you said, working with Sony and with this experiment, like one of the early thinkers about how you would use video to create a production film like that, of that magnitude. And the thing about video that's still interesting in terms of the reflection of that film is that film has been not only panned, and everyone remembers who hasn't seen it. Very few people have seen it, but those who do remember it as a film that broke Coppola. But there's a lot of people who kind of revisiting that film in terms of the aesthetics and the terms of like how the film was, you know, beautifully shot and how it looked. But do you think, I mean, not seeing the film, how does that translate from the video work that was done to the actual, you know, 70 millimeter, full blown, you know, it's a musical about, you know, two couples who have that kind of night affair and then go back? I guess that's an open question because, you know, I don't know if that's something that could be answered, but it seems like he did all this experimentation with video. Was it just kind of a practical play? Like, is that what, you know, cost the film? Like, where does that go? I guess, again,
I think you know, he was just going to make a film in a big, beautiful extravaganza, Busby Berkeley kind of film, you know, and brought up to the modern age in 70 millimeter, and I'm trying to think of the guy who he had doing the dance numbers, the famous, I can't remember. Anyway, I think the video got in the way. I really do. I think it threw him off his game, because then, you know, he thought, well, I can work out all the scenes and do everything on video, and actually then I'll have it exactly right. So when I'm burning that huge money and shooting 70 millimeter on these big sets and everybody's getting paid millions, you know, to do this kind of thing, I'll know exactly what I want because I'll have done it in high definition video. But the mistake was he went to Las Vegas and shot this really like on the street film. And I think he just really couldn't translate after that. He was still trying to make that beautiful little love story in 70 millimeter with dance numbers, you know, and they just didn't work from one from the other. I think that's what happened.
Yeah. So in your kind of experience with shooting video, at a certain point, you kind of, you know, you stopped, right? Like you mentioned that, you know, around that time in the 80s, after the Chronicle, maybe you stopped shooting video for a while. What's it like, you know, to say maybe stop being a professional in video up until the early 80s, and then stopping for however long, and then coming back to a culture that is very much predicated on that medium that in the 1970 was almost a novelty. Now it's how we're communicating right now. It's actually the water we all live in that is media. And so do you make relationships? I mean, do you think and reflect upon that moment versus now? And anything for us to think about as I'm playing nostalgic with Reclaim Video and kind of revisiting an old aesthetic and form, because, you know, obviously it was part of the story, but it seems almost arcane and an afterthought now. How do you think about that, having been intimately involved in the industry?
Well, one of the things that everything I did was kind of led by the technology. You know, the Portapak came along, and I grabbed the Portapak and did my life. And then the professional video, the Ikegami HL35, and it's the greatest story that I think of that I know is getting this camera cost $55,000. When I went to work for Evening Magazine in San Francisco, they made me a unit. You know, I worked for 6 months as a sound guy for one of the other guys. Then they said, okay, you're good. We're going to give you your own unit. We're buying you a camera. The camera comes, and it's the Cadillac of video cameras. I mean, this thing comes in this huge box. And I came in, and everybody was in that day because it was Monday when we had the production meeting, and the thing came in, and we opened up the box, and everybody wanted to see this beautiful new camera. And there was a little brochure, you know, a little booklet in the top. And we opened it up, and it was Japanese, of course, and it said, "You will treasure with pleasure your new Handy Looky 35. Handy Looky, HANDEELOOKEE, Handy Looky. Just spent $55,000 for this thing, and it's a Handy Looky. This was a beast. I mean, just keeping this thing going, keeping this thing running. I remember doing flight ops on the USS Enterprise, and the thing just failing in the middle of flight ops or out of the deck of an aircraft carrier. The thing just fails. There's nothing you can do but go home, you know, take the flight home.
So let's talk about that for a second, because you mention it in passing, but you're on the USS Enterprise shooting video of
flight ops, yeah. Flight
really?
ops. Yeah. Yeah, back in the days when everybody still hated the military because it wasn't that far after the Vietnam War. This was in about 77, 76. But the guy who trained me and who I was working for at the time was a former Vietnam film cameraman. And so he loved the military. He said, "The hell with it. We're going to go do a nice story about the military." So he calls up the military and said, "Really? You're going to do a nice story about us? Nobody does nice stories, but nobody wants to know we exist." So we went and did a lot of military stories. It was really fun. Flew a C-5A up to Alaska and all kinds of things. But
so, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No problem.
Well, all right. So just you know, so it's always been driven by the technology, and now, you know, here's the technology, right?
Yeah.
This little phone is just a cheap Android. You know, this is no big deal. This is an Galaxy S6. It's much better video than I've ever shot in my life, right? It shoots better video than I've ever shot in my life. And so I'm kind of back to my Portapak days, you know. I kind of get in the mood, and I kind of go and I videotape my life, and I come home and I watch it. And yeah, so I'm back to that. And it's fun again, you know, it's really fun again.
So you've been replaying the same technological innovation across smaller and smaller and cheaper and cheaper devices. But in fact, you know, when you think about the tool you were using in UMass and the tool you have now, like the phone, and we all have, like, I don't know if this is the case, but was it looked upon in the 70s as the Portapak cheapening the experience? Kind of like everybody having a phone and everyone taking a video, kind of, you know, a video is no longer this precious object. It's something you do to record an event, to remember to buy a thing of milk or something. Like, it's a very different experience than it would be, you know, maybe 40 years ago, 50 years ago.
You know, for me, it's still about the production values, and by that I mean, you know, everybody at some point everybody got a computer, right? And so suddenly, is everybody a writer? I mean, is everybody Saul Bellow because now I've got a word processor You know, so am I a better writer because I've got a word processor? Am I a better storyteller because I've got better technology? So, you know, like one of the things that really offended me over the years was when I would watch documentaries and stuff, or stuff on the news, and it just looked terrible. The lighting was terrible. It was shaky cam, and then shaky cam became a value. You know, now it's more real if the camera's moving around like this. And as a guy who, you know, just loved to get good, steady, clean shots as a professional, I was very offended by that. And when I see stuff that people put on YouTube, you know, and they don't even know which way to hold the camera. I mean, the phone, right? They hold it like this. Always, they hold it like this, like it's the phone, right? They don't hold it like this, but that's the aspect ratio of the image when it appears on a screen on your television set on the computer. The aspect ratio is like this, but people do it like this, and there's all this wasted. And I just look at that and I go, oh man, you don't know what you're doing. Nobody knows what they're doing anymore. So the technology, in a way, has completely cheapened things. And because I went on the professional side, you know, that's my consciousness about how cheapened it all is. But in terms of the technology, on the other hand, I was always thrilled that I could grab this little Sony Portapak and run out and make totally cheap, inexpensive video. That was like having this phone, you know, back in 1969 or 1970.
Yeah, it's interesting too. One of the things that it's at the end of the documentary Heart of Darkness that Coppola says it, and it's a kind of moment where he's talking, and I think it's in the 80s, where he's talking about like the advent of video cameras and the fact that what they're going to do is they're going to kind of blow up the profession of, you know, the movie industry as an industry, and will turn cinema making into an art. The argument being that, you know, some girl with her father's video camera in the Midwest will become the Mozart of film and will change the way we look at the medium, and that will kind of explode the medium. And he was saying this in the 80s, you know, well before the kind of YouTube explosion. And I'm not saying that Mozart has emerged from the YouTube culture just yet, but I mean, is there some truth that as the actual technology changes and as the form changes, that someone shooting with a phone straight up like this, right, actually might invent, right, reimagine for the medium, for the screens we're watching, a whole new kind of, you know, maybe I won't call it medium because it's not, but a whole new syntax for the medium we've taken for granted for 40 years. So, I mean, it's interesting how so much, again, back to Coppola, again, back to video, still also relevant about how, because whether it's art or not is an interesting question, but just how we are consuming so much of our culture and our news, like you mentioned early on with McLuhan, like it's never been more relevant, the medium of video, to communicate, to argue, to, you know, indoctrinate, you name it. So.
Yeah, but I still think it still goes back to talent. And you see, you know, sometimes you see a filmmaker who makes a film on video, and it goes to Redford's thing in Utah. What's that? Sundance. Yep. Goes to Sundance, and everybody's just, oh my God, this is that, you know, this is that major new talent. And so it goes out there, and it's an indie film, and everybody says, oh great. And then somebody pays that person, and what do? They don't make another little India film on their phone. They make a film. You know, they go and they get the good cameras, right? They shoot a film, you know, on 35 or 70 millimeter. After a couple of tries, maybe they try to hang on to that. But ultimately, you want a really beautiful image. You want beautiful sound. You want beautiful editing. You want all that creative stuff that requires just a lot of skill and talent to do. And that's what people still, I think, ultimately still want. Again, just like the word processor, anybody can get on their computer and tap away, right? Yeah. But how many great? Do you read a great novel that has come out by Jonathan Franzen or something? So that was made possible by the word processor. I don't think so. Great films and great films, great storytelling is not made possible by the technology. It's made possible by the talent and the skill.
Well, it's interesting too, and one of the things that video does, I mean, kind of think back to, let's say, 2001, Space Odyssey. Obviously not a film for video, a beautiful masterpiece in film, Well, one of the things that he highlights there is the father calling back from the moon station on a video screen to his daughter. And there's those moments in cinema, and there's moments in the popular imagination beyond cinema, of video as this doorway, as this communication portal, maybe beyond, like you're saying, and I don't argue with that, like the idea of filming and narrative as an art form. But the idea of just video has become a very practical reality that all of us in some ways use to communicate with loved ones, to do our job, to video in, to actually make a sales call or whatever you're doing, like to interview someone who's halfway around the world, to talk about video in the 70s. Like, so video is actually, it's almost become ubiquitous. You know, even apart from the art of it, there's also just like the omnipresence of video being videotaped everywhere we go, like the whole closed circuit TV video and what people do with that. So it's almost like that would almost be the art of it would almost be one subsection of an entire universe of a medium that we kind of depend on in more ways. Just listing them, it's insane.
Yeah, no, it's true. We got the voice, we got voice over distance 100 years ago, and now we have picture over distance, and now we're just totally sanguine about it. I mean, I went to a Bernie Sanders rally, you know, the first rally he had in Phoenix, Arizona. 1,100 people showed up, and I periscoped it, you know, out to everybody, so everybody could see this amazing thing that was happening. But there was no art in that. And the storytelling was not mine. A little bit, you know, sort of showing the crowd, a little bit of setting the scene and so on. But mostly it was just like, look, here's Bernie. And I could bring you Bernie because I'm here and you're not. And so, yeah, there's that. But I really ultimately, I think we are storytelling animals. And the fact that we have this ability to do visual storytelling at a distance now is kind of great. But ultimately, as it made us all sort of more in tune with each other and more creative with each other and more empathetic with each other. Well, look at YouTube. I don't think so.
I hope no one leaves a comment on this video. That's awesome. Well, John, I want to not only thank you for showing up, but also for sharing your stories about not only the medium, but also your experience of it. And then beyond that, like us having a token of your video past at Reclaim Video with the Omnivision, which should be arriving any day, which we're thrilled about.
It'll arrive by FedEx tomorrow.
Well, that's so cool.
Thank you very much for doing this. And thank you to Reclaim Video also for buying my VCR.
I know, it's awesome.
You're going to enjoy it. It's beautiful.
Yeah, we'll send you our first kind of, when it's up and working, we'll send you an image. And thanks again for having the call with us.
Thank you, Jim.
All right, bye-bye.